What if I told you that one of the most important travel guides in American history was built not by a corporation or by the government, but by a Black postal worker, his wife, an entire underground network of everyday people, the ordinary people who made safe travel possible during segregation? Today, we're talking about the human engine behind Overground Railroad by Candacy Taylor, the people who made the Green Book not just a publication, but a lifeline. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Bridget. This is my bookshelf, and I talk about books through the lens of history, culture, and lived experience. This is week 2 of my Overground Railroad series, and today we're focusing on some of the individual people who made the Green Book possible because this story isn't just about places, it's about people. Just a quick recap in part 1, and I introduced the concept of traveling while Black and the dangers it entailed and currently entails in the US. I mentioned the reality of sundown towns, which were, as Taylor tells us, a huge concern for Black motorists getting stranded in a sundown town, which was an all white enclave that banned Black people from entering after dark. Black families would often pack sheets and blankets, which doubled as a privacy partition. So if they had to relieve themselves on the side of the road, they could do so in privacy because they couldn't use the restroom at a store or at a gas station. And I want you to take a moment and picture yourself in the shoes of a Black family during the mid 20th century and understand that the Green Book was created in order to provide a list of safe locations where Black people could stop and rest in these types of situations. Victor Hugo Green was the visionary behind the Green Book. So we're going to talk about the origins of this network and start with him. He was a postal worker in Harlem. He was not a publisher by trade. He was not a media mogul like we think of today. He didn't have social media, but he had something just as powerful that was access to these locations and awareness of a problem. And as a mail carrier, Mr. Green was part of a very vast communication network. He saw how information moved and more importantly, how it didn't always reach the Black travelers who needed it. He recognized a gap, and Black travelers didn't have a reliable and central way to know where they could safely eat, sleep, or even stop for gas. So in 1936, 90 years ago, he created the Negro Motorist Green Book. This is what stands out to me is that it wasn't just a guide, it was an act of resistance because during this time in a segregated America, and even today, access to information was survival. Another person that I'm going to discuss is Alma Green. Miss Alma was Mr. Green's wife. I think that she's often overlooked, so we're going to discuss her. Mr. Green and his wife lived in the Sugar Hill area of Harlem, and they weren't the only people who had a directory for Black travelers. So Mr. Green may be known for starting the Green Book, but Miss Alma and almost all of the Green Book staff members were women. So there's so much more about this in the book. You have to read about Miss Novera Dashel as well as Miss Dorothy Ashe. And she was the Green Book PR representative. They had a power team and they carried the legacy of the Green Book after Mr. Green died in 1960. So Miss Alma is not always centered in the conversation about the Green Book, but Miss Taylor, our author, makes it clear that Miss Alma was essential. She wasn't just supporting from the sidelines or cheering everybody on. She was actively involved in the business and the distribution of the guide. I want to think about what it took to run something like this in the 1930s and 1940s as a Black woman. She is integral in making sure that the printing is going on, the operations, the organizing, the listing by state. She's managing the logistics, and this was a family operation. And like so many women, especially Black women, her labor was essential to this and foundational, even if it wasn't always publicly credited. So I want to shout out to the women who owned businesses at the Green Book sites as well and stood up to Jim Crow. We have women like Miss Geneva Haugebrooks of Atlanta, Georgia, Miss Mary Jane Elizabeth Coulter. She built a Green Book site in Gallup, New Mexico. And we also have Miss Majeska Simpkins of South Carolina. All of these ladies are featured in Overground Railroad. I was not aware of these ladies before I read this book, and I learned so much about them. And they represent the invisible infrastructure behind these very visible movements. Now I'm going to turn our attention to Mr. James A. Jackson. I got to learn about him as well. He is part of what we would call a contributor network. The Green Book wasn't just built by Mr. Victor Green alone, as we found out with the family contributing and Miss Alma, his wife, and the team. It relied on this network of contributors and people across the country who submitted information about safe places. So Mr. James A. Jackson represented something even bigger behind this collective effort. The Esso Gas Company hired Black marketing executives like Mr. James A. Jackson. This was, again, something new that I learned as a result of reading this book. Mr. Jackson helped by selling copies of the Green Book at these Esso stations. Esso is now known as ExxonMobil, and there's this really interesting backstory of reason why the Esso company was such a progressive corporation during the 1930s and 1940s. But then there's another connection between Mr. James A. Jackson, the Billboard magazine, and the legendary Marsalis family. Yes, the Marsalis jazz legend family. We'll find out a little bit more about these people and these connections in part 3, but I wanted to mention that because it's so fascinating to me. They shared tips, they updated the listings for the different Green Book sites. This wasn't just a passive leadership. This was a whole community participating in this. This reminds me that the Green Book wasn't just a flyer that came out and listed places. This was crowdsourcing 90 plus, 90, 80, 70 years ago. Crowdsourcing was a survival tool before we had the language to describe it. Now we're going to zoom out for just a moment and look at every listing in the Green Book as a person. It was a business owner who was willing to serve Black travelers, or it was a traveler who was willing to share what they learned. These were hotel owners, these were gas station attendants, these were restaurant operators, and let's not forget about the Pullman Porters Network. They were on the railroads. They knew the different places that people were traveling, white and Black. These were people who made a choice. This was often a very risky choice to be part of this network. We have to remember that being listed in the Green Book was not a neutral decision. This was a statement. This was saying, you are safe here. You are safe stopping in this location. In the Jim Crow era, that statement carried a lot of weight. One of the most powerful takeaways for me when I read this book is that the Green Book worked because of trust. People trusted each other. It wasn't backed by a large company necessarily or a corporation. You had some corporate buy in, but this was community. This was community built, community led, and this was literally people helping each other move through a hostile world. We might talk about innovation today. I think of it in science and clinical research, in which I've worked in public health. We talk about innovation in a scientific manner, but we don't always think of innovation in something like this. But this was innovation. This was social, cultural, deeply human innovation. On page 147, I noticed that the author, Miss Taylor, has a quote, and I'm going to read it. She says, "The mere creation of the Green Book in the first place was an audacious, brave, and political act on his part, on the part of Mr. Green." I really had to sit with that and think about it because it's so true. The Green Book wasn't just about avoiding danger, it was about creating possibilities. That is part of that innovation to me. That possibility was built by people who may never have imagined the long term impact of their contributions. Mr. Green hoped that the guide would no longer be needed. I don't know if we're there yet, but maybe one day we will. And, he hoped that one day Black travelers would not have to rely on a separate system to stay safe. And that hope really says everything. The goal wasn't just survival, but it was equality. So if this part of the story stood out to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who do you think plays a similar role today? People who quietly build systems that help others navigate difficult spaces. Drop that in the comments. And if you are following the series, and I hope you are, next week we're diving into the actual places that are listed in the Green Book. What were those places? What did they mean? What's left of them today? Make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss out. If you found value in this video, if you learned something new, please like, subscribe, share it with someone who loves reading, someone who loves history that centers real people and real stories. I'll see you next time.